Thank you, Paola, and thank you for having me. I'm really delighted and excited to be here. I'm going to be talking about dynamic population estimates for low and middle income countries based on mobile phone data today. And I will start by giving you a brief overview of who we are as an organization, Flowminder. We are a Swedish non-profit organization that is specialized in data analysis and statistics and reporting. We do statistics based on mobile phone data. We also work on site optimization, and we always work in cooperation with low and middle income countries to support humanitarian and development efforts. That is our goal and our mission. Our funding comes from large international foundations and also government ministries and agencies. And we are doing this work particularly to support low and middle income countries because these are often data scarce environments where population data, also data about the movement of the population, is either not available or outdated or difficult to come by. We work on a large range of countries. Currently, our three main focus countries are Ghana, Haiti, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. We are starting up the work also in Pakistan and work on Papua New Guinea, Nigeria, South Sudan, and other countries. We started our work in 2010 when our founder, Linus Bengtsson, went to Haiti after this massive earthquake had struck Haiti. And one of the urgent questions at that time was how to provide support to the population and how to know where people were and where aid efforts need to be directed. And for example, where people were displaced to. And from this came the idea to use available data sources, such as mobile phone data for development, or in this case humanitarian purposes, and to see where people were moving after that event. This map shows exactly that, movement out of the capital, out of Port-au-Prince, to other areas of Haiti. And we're still working on that country and providing regular reports. I will come back to that. Always important to mention at the beginning is data protection and privacy. We are fully GDPR compliant and have to be as an European organization, and have a number of technical and procedural standards in place to ensure that data protection is always ensured. That, for example, starts with the fact that we never process actual phone numbers or any other direct identifiers of people, but only work with pseudonymized data, and these data stay in country on a dedicated server, and only the aggregated results, the aggregated totals, are extracted and further processed by us. And we also follow principles of transparency and peer review on methods, and method reports are quite detailed, and we also regularly publish in academic journals. What are call detail records and how do these data look like? Call detail records are, in the beginning, event data. They record an event per ID per time. So at the very minimum, these CDR source data contain a hashed ID. This is what people start to work with. A date timestamp and a cell ID of the cell of that mobile network. And the second data set contains at least the cell ID and the geolocation, the actual coordinates of the cell or cell tower where that cell is located. And with these data, the first transformation is from event data to ID data, to sum it up per ID. And then we usually also try to get the event type, the volume of the call, the SMS, or the mobile data session, and then map these geolocations of the cells to a map usually of admin areas in the country. Admin 2 or 3 areas is the level that we work on. And also important to mention here, we currently work with data that cover the country, the respective country, but no roaming data. So what we can assess is mobility and presence within the country. There are several advantages to using such data compared to standard data sources such as surveys and censuses. A big advantage is that it's data that is already collected, that is already available, because the data are already collected by the MNO, the mobile network operator, for billing purposes. They offer very high temporal granularity up to the second, and high spatial granularity to the degree that cells are distributed. I'll come to that next. And they're also very recent. Once you have a data pipeline set up, as we always try to do in those countries, they become available within a few days. Once you have data access, it's low maintenance and low costs, but getting there, setting up an agreement, a contract, and technical infrastructure to allow that can be lengthy and high setup costs. The data usually do not contain socio-demographic variables. Socio-demographic variables usually have literally the ID and the location, and this is additional information that you usually try to get from surveys. And as other big data sources, there are several layers of selectivity and potential biases that come with the analysis of such data, and this is what I'll be coming to in a few moments. The spatial resolution of those data depends on the density of the cell network. As you can see here in this picture that shows you cell towers in an urban area, that cell density is usually much higher in urban areas, much lower in rural areas. Of course, there are rural areas that are not covered by any cell, and usually these are also the areas that are not populated. But we, of course, have seen in various places that there are populations that are not covered by a particular MNO network. So the biases that can occur both happen on the measurement and the representation side. I put measurement here in quotation marks because the data as they are collected, as they are constructed, are not meant to measure mobility or population. They are meant for billing. But the schema, I think, is still appropriate. So there can be errors due to how location and mobility is operationalized by Flowminder. It can be due to data errors or artifacts in the original data. For example, when a location of a cell is misplaced, we also see that sometimes. Errors due to subsettings, so not all the IDs are used for every monthly statistics, but some are discarded. Data gaps can introduce errors. And obviously the population coverage of the phone-using population and of the particular MNO data that is used, and also user activity can introduce a bias. So looking at this graph, you always feel that the accumulation of such biases can completely make the analysis very difficult, but of course the methodologists try to mitigate as much of these biases as possible. To give you a quick idea of the measurement side of how we identify both a location and a flow, a change of location, we always start with daily locations. So for every day where there's an event for a user, we take the last event of the day as to identify a location, as is done by most researchers, and then to arrive at monthly statistics, create a moving window throughout that month where we allow gaps of up to 6 days, so at minimum every 7 days there has to be an event for that ID to have a monthly location. There's actually an additional rule that allows, that ensures that there's a bit more data, and only if, based on these 7-day moving windows, there's a location for each of the days in a month, then this is further used to create a monthly location. Of course, this doesn't have to be always, and is not always, the same place or the same admin area, the same district, for example. But if a majority of these derived daily locations is the same location, then this becomes the monthly stay location or home location, as it's also called in literature. Then there's a fallback rule. If 50% is not a dominant majority, then we look back 1 month and use that home location as in combination with the current month, 33%, and otherwise discard IDs to be unlocatable for that month. That then becomes the monthly location that we measure, and relocations are simply defined, monthly relocations are defined as a change of this home location from 1 month to the next. Now coming to the representation side and possible representation biases, MNO subscribers are not a random sample of the population, and we also cannot assume that they are. And we've seen that in several surveys and in other studies. So they are, the data are not a probability sample, but a non-probability sample, if you will. And indeed, we also see that from surveys that the mobility of phone users can be quite different from the mobility of non-users. Usually we see that the mobility of phone users is higher. The example here is a very clear one that shows you in Ghana in 2022, where we were allowed to join this survey and ask questions about phone use. The mobility, as measured as a trip of 5 kilometers or more, was 60% among phone users, and among non-phone users only around 30%. So quite a stark difference. To be fair, not all of the difference we see in the survey data is that large, but it's certainly enough to merit bias adjustment and to show that this can become a serious problem when producing unadjusted statistics. We have developed methods to bias adjust and scale to the entire population these relocations between sub-regions per month and residents.
Hi, Roland. I don't know if you can hear me, but we don't hear you online.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it better now? Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear, thanks.
That is Daniel, our director. We're following a method that is also suggested in the Eurostat working paper 2018, exactly on these topics of bias adjustment of big data. A linear correction for domain-level parameters. We have seen multiple times, and it's quite clear that the share of the MNO and the share of phone users is not a single factor. It's not the same across the country. It's indeed very different between urban and rural areas. So a national level adjustment is not sufficient. We really need in this case, sub-regional adjustment. So that's why domain level and the 3 main factors that are discussed here is an adjustment for a population coverage by domain, the active users subset coverage by domain, and the share of the particular data source, and in our case that is often the MNO share out of all phone users. Of course, there are still drawbacks to this weighting method, because the domain level coverage and the market share at the domain level is often unknown and itself needs to be estimated, and this is where survey data also come in. Where possible, we use existing survey data that are regularly collected in these countries, such as the MIX and DHS surveys. The DHS survey, for example, regularly includes questions on mobile phone use and also on mobility. The ideal scenario when these data are sufficiently recent. If these are not available, we aim to partner up with partner organizations in the country that already run surveys or plan to run them in the near future, and then ask for survey modules to be submitted on mobile phone use and on mobility. or else commission and coordinate primary survey data collection, as I'm showing here with a very large microcensus that we ran and coordinated in the DRC in 7 provinces, where more than 70,000 households were interviewed. The method in the formula is twofold, because it relies both on the relocations data and the residence data. We start with the baseline population estimate that we derive from third-party sources, often the UN World Population Projections for a country that we break down into sub-regions. Or also the national population estimate that is available from the Statistics Institute, if there is one, or a projection to the start month where we have data access to MNO data. Based on that baseline population, we then add for each month the net flows, the estimated net flows to that sub-region, and apply a population change rate that also has to be derived from third-party data, because MNO data do not include any information on fertility and mortality or immigration and emigration. So these usually population growth in the countries that we work in, we have to factor in from existing estimates or projections. What we do bring in with these data is the internal mobility or internal migration component. And we build this monthly residence iteratively. From month to month, we always add the estimated net flows being the difference between inflows and outflows to a sub-region. And these estimates are built on the flow estimates, and this is where the actual weighting comes in. The CDR aggregates of flows between sub-regions A and B and months M and N are used and adjusted and scaled by the number of SIMs per user. Not every ID, not every SIM is a person, but of course a person can have multiple SIMs. We have that from the survey data. We have to factor in the lack of population coverage, that is both the MNO share that we get from the survey data per sub-region or per domain, and here per flow, as far as this is discernible from survey data. A factor to also include the mobility of children. We have that also from survey data, and very young children are always excluded from MNO data, from CDR data. And time series adjustment factor, because we see over time that, particularly with this long time series that we now have, that the volume of the data does change over time, not necessarily because the population is drastically changing, but because market shares can change. And indeed, this is a symbolic graph that I'm showing here. We have seen this multiple times, that if you just look at the CDR aggregates of stocks and flows of persons per day or per month, and flow aggregates, stock aggregates can change quite dramatically, for example, gradually decreasing over time, or also having drops in between when there's a national, when there's, for example, a hurricane or a major disruption in the network, power outages, or also changes in tariffs, changes in market shares of providers where these numbers go up and down, not indicative necessarily of population change, so this can be due to various reasons, but the flow aggregates are much more stable. Of course, they're not entirely insulated against any of these changes. They also move in a similar direction, but much less than the CDR stock data, and that's why we don't scale up the stocks, the daily locations, up to the population or the monthly locations, but we scale the flows. And this also is necessary because we see these mobility differentials, so phone users and non-users are different, and that is really different per flow, group of flows. In a nutshell, in one visual, this is the overall picture. We start with the CDR aggregates of bilateral flows between regions, and these are quite fine-grained. There are often 60,000, 70,000 flows between sub-regions in the country, many of them in small numbers, some in medium and large size. We then add the weights from surveys, including confidence intervals based on survey parameters to create estimates of these bilateral flows, then sum them up to total inflows and outflows per area or sub-area, and then add these total inflows and outflows and flows to the baseline estimate for the first month, and adding in the population change estimate, and then arrive at the monthly population estimates for the entire time series per sub-region for the entire country, if we have data for the entire. To show you how that looks and some of the results we have produced for Ghana, I'm showing you three graphs here to also show the logic. On the left side, we have a map of all districts in Ghana with the population and the change compared to a previous month. I can't show the exact months here, but this is just an example. So this is one of the monthly estimates per district in Ghana, 272 statistical districts. Then in the middle we have the estimates of flows, only showing the top flows here. If you were to show the entire graph of all flows in the data, the map would be not readable, because then you have all possible connections, or almost all possible connections. And you can already see from the structure, and if you know the urban areas, the cities in Ghana, there's clearly major connections between those urban areas, and fewer connections to rural areas. And these estimated bilateral flows are then added to the previous month resident estimate to arrive at the subsequent month estimate. Shown as a time series for one of the districts, Cape Coast North District in central Ghana, and showing here a graph that for a district that has quite large fluctuations, we do see quite some seasonal or cyclical fluctuations. We see particularly these cyclical patterns for districts that host universities in Ghana. This particular district hosts Cape Coast University, and our working hypothesis, also in exchange with our partners with Ghana Statistical Institute, is that is indeed student populations moving in and out of the district over time. And if you compare that to the line shown in gold, that is applying a projected population growth based on UN data, you see the stark difference, of course. If you were just to apply an annual projected change rate, this is much less informative, or looks much more stable than the estimates we are providing on the monthly CDR data that we put into these models. And we indeed have time series for each of the 272 districts in Ghana for the entire period from January, actually much longer from January 2020 to December 2023, and we're frequently adding the latest months. And we are in discussion with Ghana Statistical Institute to also produce reports on these statistics with the endorsement by the Statistics Institute. Now coming to the caveats, and I think this is where we'll have the discussion afterwards. Of course, there's still limitations to these estimates and still questions around them. We have seen in some countries, Ghana not so much, but in other countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, that particularly the change estimates, the relative change, depends a lot on the baseline population estimates, and these differ by source. Taking the UN estimates, or for example, World Pops estimates, or other estimates based on building footprint data, or national sources, can have very different numbers, and thus all subsequent estimates change. Speaking about survey data that are part of this model of scales, if you drill down into subregions or indeed flows between subregions, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to have separate parameter estimates per flow. So the flows have to be grouped, and further assumptions have to be made that the groups are sufficiently capturing the variation. And indeed, to model or to validate all these estimates, what you require is really census data, very fine-grained and spatially distributed data to allow such validation. And we're doing that for Ghana with the Ghana Census 2021. Also, the survey data used should not be just cross-sectional for one point in time. If you're going to have these long time series estimates, you really do need longitudinal, at least repeated surveys over time to see and assess the change of the survey parameters. We cannot assume that they are stable over a long period of time, particularly the share of phone users, which is usually increasing over time. And the difficulty, particularly with the flow data, the flow estimates, is that there's hardly any validation data, particularly on a monthly level. To the best of our knowledge, the best users also work with other institutions such as IOM and their displacement tracking matrix and UNHCR that also have flow statistics to compare how our statistics match with theirs. And perhaps also obviously in areas of a country where there's very low coverage both of phone users and of a particular MNO, these flow statistics might greatly underestimate migration and mobility. So, summarizing, CDR data alone are not sufficient and not a solution in most cases, but actually standard data sources are required. So this debate about big data replacing standard data sources is probably a bit exaggerated. Big data can be a great complementary source to use, and indeed this bias adjustment requires standard data sources. Big data are only as big as their population coverage. Having 3 million cases in a data set sounds good in the beginning, but if the entire population is 30 million, then you have 10% of the population and not a probability sample. So these monthly population estimates are certainly feasible. We're working on further improvements and development of that method, and this is also then very much looking forward to the discussion. And I think to most of the audience it's clear that this bias adjustment can never reduce bias to zero, but hopefully mitigate it to some degree. I'm closing with an outlook. Some of the steps we are taking now and in the future, we are looking to improve this reweighting method by considering the distribution of flows and resulting distribution of the estimates. Should have the same distribution of properties, and indeed you already see that in the census data. There's various approaches for bias adjustment and weighting suggested in the literature, not just this linear method that we will apply and compare to, but then also publish on. We are already using geospatial data for other applications that we have other use cases in the countries we work with. And I'm looking also to integrate these, for example, geospatial data in these estimates. We also aim to produce long-term aggregates. The method I was showing you today for daily locations, monthly locations, and monthly relocations basically just looks at data from 1 month and maybe the previous month, but not the longer time series, and population statistics of the usually resident population do take into account 6 or 12 months of data, and to align with that, we are also working towards that. And to close with a country example for Haiti, a very small graph I'm showing here. We regularly produce and are currently also have just published another report on Haiti, a country in a deep crisis due to the gang violence in Port-au-Prince and the surrounding areas, with displacement happening, and we can also see that in the data we are using and in the estimates we are producing, displacement out of Port-au-Prince, and we are closely working with IOM and other organizations to compare and assess these IDP estimates, and this is exactly what we strive to do, provide data to countries that are struggling and to support the organizations and the population on the ground. Thank you.
Amazing overview of methodology, which is a little bit outside of the standard demographic methodology, but very exciting, and also with, of course, a lot of issues and questions. So I'm sure that